There's a lot people say you're supposed to do when someone you love gets hurt. Report it, get help, trust the system. But when the system doesn't work, when the person who victimized another is still out there walking free, when the person you love can't sleep at night, well, what then? You start asking yourself different questions. Questions about what this life really is, whether fairness and justice even exist. Last year, my boyfriend was assaulted. He didn't tell me when it happened. He didn't tell anyone. He carried it quietly and alone because the guy who did it told him straight to his face that he'd kill him if he went to the police. I found out what had happened this week, and when I did, I felt something inside of me shift. I already knew about this guy. I had heard the stories. Our particular community is small and tight-knit, so I had heard his exes whisper about him. Things that didn't get reported, things that never made it to the authorities, but absolutely things that should have. And yet, here he was, still walking around town living his life, probably thinking he was untouchable. Meanwhile, my boyfriend, the person that I love most, was living with the weight of it, carrying this thing for over a year because he was too scared to do anything about it. And I couldn't stand it. That feeling of helplessness, of knowing that someone you love has been violated and broken in a way that you can't fix. It makes you feel sick. And then, it makes you furious. I sat with it for a day. Just one. I didn't talk about it, didn't post about it, didn't ask anyone for advice. But I came to a decision on my own. I work in hazardous environments for a living, so I already had something in my garage that most people don't. A full contaminant blocking suit. No fibers, no fingerprints, no sweat, no trace. And if I were to wear something underneath it that I never wore again, even better. I found an old hoodie in my closet, some beat up jeans and sneakers, things that I wouldn't need afterward. I didn't take my car. That would be stupid. Instead, I took my bike, and I didn't leave from home. That would be even stupider. I rode 12 miles from a wooded area outside of town, off of all the main roads, keeping to trails, making sure that I wasn't going to pass a grocery store or a bank. No cameras, no records, no trace. And then I knocked on his door. It was just after sunset, but not too late. Just the right time of night for someone to still open their door willingly. And when he opened it, I didn't wait. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't let him speak. The moment I saw his face, I slammed him into the doorframe so hard that I felt his nose break. It wasn't a crack. It was this deep, wet crunch, almost like stepping on a rotten piece of wood. His face began gushing blood instantly. Some of it hitting me, but most of it hitting the floor. He barely had time to react before I grabbed the back of his head and slammed him into the wood again, only harder this time. This split his forehead clean open, and he went down in a heap, his body folding under him like a rag doll. That's when I leaned down, crouched right next to his ear. I could hear him gasping, that sound of blood bubbling from his nose, likely still trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. That's when I told him, quiet and steady, I know everyone in the gay community in this town. I let it sit for a second, let the weight of what I said sink in. Then I got up, turned around, and walked out the door without another word. By the time I was back on my bike, my heart had finally started to slow. I rode the same way I came, back through the woods, taking my time, doing all I could to let that adrenaline wear off. I wasn't worried. No car, no cameras, no evidence. The suit was gone by the next night, burned in the bonfire I have every Friday. The clothes I wore underneath, those are out of here too. The best part of all of this, he won't report it. Because what's he going to say? I got my ass beat in my own doorway by someone I can't identify? Oh, and by the way, it might have been because I assaulted someone and threatened to kill them if they told anyone. Nah, he'll stay quiet, because men like that always do. I imagine that a lot of people here would say that I should feel bad about what I did, that I should feel remorse, guilt, or shame, that I should be a better person than this man, and that violence isn't the answer. But I don't necessarily agree with that here. This was force meeting force, and the force that his face hit that door with will likely give him pause the next time he thinks about victimizing someone else. So no, I don't feel bad, not for a second. And I know that not everyone will agree with what I did. Some people out there believe in law, in forgiveness, in letting the system work things out, but I also know that for so many victims, that's not how this world works. They report it, they'll go to court, they do everything right, and nothing happens. Their abuser walks away free, while they're left picking up the shattered pieces of their life. That's why people like me exist. What I did, it's not a rare thing. It's just never talked about. If you're hearing this, if you're someone who has been hurt, someone who feels alone, someone who thinks that no one cares, you're wrong. Someone does, and they always will. I don't expect people to understand what I did. I don't expect people to agree with it. But I know this. My boyfriend sleeps a little easier now. I don't regret a damn thing. And that guy, he'll think twice before hurting anyone else. That's enough for me. I know folks love to swap stories about their crazy ex. It's almost like a badge of honor. Like, man, you wouldn't believe what I went through with this one. But let me tell you something. Your crazy ex? Mine was actually criminally insane. And I don't mean haha, she slashed my tires type of crazy. I mean calling the cops on me with fake DV accusations, breaking into my life like a parasite, and eventually racking up so many criminal charges that she's basically in jail more than she's out now. I dated this woman. I lived through it. And I'm still not sure how I got out unscathed. When I met her, she was ex-military, sober, stable, and at first, honestly pretty normal. I met her at one of my lowest points, a time when I wasn't exactly making the best life choices. So I guess I ignored a lot of the little red flags because I just wanted something that would make my life feel more full, something that would make me feel better. And it wasn't long before I uttered those 3 stupid words. I love you. And it's at that point that the cracks really started to show. She outright said she didn't believe me, said I was full of shit. And maybe I was, in the sense that I didn't even know what I was feeling at the time. I was just trying to hold on to something in a life that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. But she didn't just not believe me. She began acting like I had committed some unforgivable crime by even saying it. And that's when things started going off the rails. At that time, I was living in a motel. Not exactly an ideal place to deal with a relationship meltdown, but there we were. We had just had one of those classic bad fights, the kind where you realize deep down that this relationship isn't just bad, it's a trap. I told her to leave, but she refused. I got pissed and threatened to call the cops to make her leave. But before I could even reach for my phone, she had grabbed hers, called them first, and told them that I had hit her. Yeah, I don't know how I lucked out, but when the cops showed up, they didn't believe her. I think they could smell crazy from down the block. Maybe it was because she hadn't totally committed to the lie. I mean, she hadn't bothered to bash her face into the wall or scratch herself up to sell the story. One of the cops, probably seeing the sheer exhaustion on my face, actually pulled me aside and told me, "Dude, you gotta stay away from the crazy ones." Great advice. Wish that it was something I had followed sooner. After finally getting away from that motel hellhole, I moved into a new place for a fresh start, or at least I thought. She called me out of nowhere one day, voice shaking, saying that she was sorry, that she missed me, and that she wanted to make things right. I didn't fall for it. I don't think I was that stupid. But I know where I screwed up. I let my guard down just enough to answer one question. where are you living now? It wasn't something that I had thought much of at the time, but I'd realized later that it was a huge mistake. Turns out, she wasn't trying to patch things up. She was just looking for a way back in. And by some horrific stroke of luck, she found one when she managed to befriend the girlfriend of the guy that I was renting from. Before I knew it, she was hanging out at my house. Not because I invited her, not because I wanted her there, but because she had embedded herself into my new life. For months, I lived with the stress of knowing she was right there, in another part of my house, twisting the narrative, making herself look like the victim, filling my roommates' heads with lies. I now couldn't even relax in my own home, and when I tried to warn them about her, they didn't believe me. Not at first. But then one night, like she's known to do, she finally lost it completely. She showed up at the house uninvited, manic and refusing to leave. Suddenly, the guy that I was renting from and his girlfriend finally got it. They saw what I had been dealing with for months, and they promptly freaked out. They physically removed her from the house, told her they'd call the cops if she came back. Great, finally. But it didn't stop there. The next day, she showed up at my job. I was lucky because I had called out sick that day, but that didn't stop her from marching in and screaming at my boss, calling him a liar when he told her that I wasn't there. It felt like she was trying to hunt me down at that point, and I knew the only way to be free was to disappear completely. Within a week, I moved. No roommates, no shared spaces, just me. And within a few years, I had packed up my entire life and moved across the country. Not because I was still scared of her, not because I thought she'd find me, but because I needed to know with 100% certainty that I'd never run into her again. Well, a year after I cut her off completely, I got a little curious, just a little. I Googled her name, and I found that she had completely self-destructed. First, a DUI, not surprising. But the assault and battery on the cops who arrested her, that was a shock. Then another DUI, more assault charges, add in the benefit of drug charges, and it just kept happening. She was now getting arrested every few months, and for the past 2 years, she's rarely spent time out of jail. Her most recent charge was something generic, violating probation or bail conditions, something like that. But that just means more time in county. I don't feel bad for her, not even a little bit. If anything, I hope she stays in jail, or maybe even a psych ward, permanently. I know it's been a few years, but it's actually a relief to finally say that she's someone else's problem now. I've never really talked about this, not to my family, not to my closest friends, except for the few who were there that night. It's been years, but some things don't fade with time. Some moments burn themselves into your memory, replaying over and over, no matter how much you try to silence them. This is one of those moments. I was in college at the time, part of a fraternity, living the kind of life you'd expect from someone in their early 20s. Parties, late nights, schoolwork that I probably didn't take as seriously as I should have. That night, I was out picking up liquor for a party we were planning for the following evening, what would otherwise be a simple errand. It was late, but I hadn't been drinking. I wasn't distracted. I was just driving home on a street I had taken 100 times before. The road was dark, but it wasn't deserted. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement and everything felt normal. Just another quiet evening drive back to the house. In fact, I don't even remember why I looked down at my radio. Maybe I was switching the station, maybe I was changing the volume. It was just a second, just 1 second. But when I looked back up, he was already there. There was no time to react. I couldn't swerve, I couldn't hit the brakes, nothing. By the time that my brain processed that someone was crossing the street, it was already too late. I felt the impact before I really saw it. That heavy, sickening thud as a body hit the hood of my car, rolling up for just a moment before tumbling off to the side. And that's a sound that I still hear when I close my eyes at night. I screamed. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding so hard that I thought it was going to explode. And for a brief, horrible moment, I considered hitting the gas and running. The thought flashed through my mind. Just hit it, drive, and pretend like this never happened. Maybe no one would know. Maybe I could escape it. But I knew deep down that I couldn't. I pulled over, hands shaking so violently that I could barely put the car into park. I jumped out and ran to where he had landed, my legs feeling like they might just give out beneath me. The moment I got to him, I knew. His family was already outside. They had been standing by the restaurant that he had just left, and they had seen the whole thing. I could hear their screams, a sound so raw and broken that it felt like it was ripping through me. He was lying on the pavement, body twisted in a way that looked wrong, blood spilling from his nose and mouth. 2 men were crouched down beside him, trying to do something, anything, but it was clear that he was beyond help. I stood there frozen, before I just dropped to my knees on the curb across from his family, my hands pulling at my own hair and my entire body shaking with shock. I remember saying over and over, I didn't see him. I didn't see him. It was all I could think, all I could process. But what did that matter? What did it matter that it was an accident? A man was lying there dying because I didn't see him. The paramedics arrived pretty quickly. I watched as they lifted his body onto a stretcher, as the red and blue lights flashed across the pavement, as his family screamed in the background. And that's when something happened that I still can't fully comprehend. The man's wife walked over to me. I had been sitting there curled in on myself, sobbing harder than I've ever done in my life. I couldn't face her. I just couldn't. But she sat beside me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, that same shoulder that I expected to be hit, shoved, and cursed at. And all she said was, I was married to him for almost 50 years. We had a good life. And then she hugged me. She forgave me. I was at a complete loss. I couldn't speak. And even if I could, how do you respond to that? Her simple acts nearly broke me. And as I watched them load him into an ambulance, part of me went with him that night. Legally, it was ruled an accident. There were no charges. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't speeding, and there were no drugs in my system. One of my friends picked me up from the police station that night, and I don't remember the drive home. I don't remember what I said. I don't really remember the next few weeks all that well either. What I do remember? The guilt. It was like a weight pressing down on me every second of every day. I drank to drown it out, not just socially, heavily. I stopped going to class, stopped caring about anything, and by my senior year, I had dropped out completely. I couldn't hold down a job, couldn't be responsible in my own life. I moved back in with my parents because I didn't feel like I had any other choice. I had hit rock bottom and just kept digging. One night, I swallowed a handful of pills. I just wanted out. But somewhere deep in the haze, I realized that I didn't want to die. That was the night that I decided that I needed to crawl out of that hole, the one that I had spent so much time digging for myself. Recovery wasn't easy, and I don't think I'll ever fully recover. But slowly, piece by piece, I started putting myself back together. I joined the Navy, not out of some noble desire to serve, but because I needed discipline, structure, something to stop me from completely withering myself. And it worked. I saw parts of the world that I never thought I'd see. I met people who helped me find a purpose again. And now, after almost a decade, I'm finally on track to go back to school and finish what I started. It took years. It took everything I had left in the tank. But I'm here. And for the first time since that night, I feel like I might actually deserve to be. There are some things that you'll just never get over. I don't believe in time heals all wounds. Time doesn't heal anything. It just teaches you how to carry the weight. I still think about his wife's forgiveness. I can still hear the sound of his family screaming, and I still hyper-focus on that single second that I took my eyes off the road. But after all these years, I'm finally able to go out again, be with my friends, live my life. Maybe there really is a light at the end of the tunnel. And if that's the case, I hope that I'm finally starting to see it.